Dad, you've become a burden. Maybe it's time to find another place to wait for the end. Those words tore through me like a blade pressed straight into my chest. My own son, the boy I taught to tie a tie, to drive, to stand straight, stood there, leaning on the doorframe of the house I built with my own hands, speaking like I was some old piece of furniture that had lost its shine. I can still remember the morning light hitting his face, cold and merciless, cutting through the blinds and drawing sharp lines across his eyes. He looked detached, almost professional, as if he were closing a deal. I tried to laugh at first, some ridiculous instinct to pretend it was a joke. "Daniel," I said, my voice trembling, "what the hell are you talking about?" But he didn't blink. He just looked past me, at the walls, the photos, the smell of the house. The home that once smelled of Margaret's perfume, lavender and old paper, now carried a strange emptiness, as if even her memory had been evicted. "I mean it, Dad," he said, crossing his arms. "You need care. Someone to look after you. I can't keep doing this." "Doing what?" I snapped. "Letting me breathe under the same roof as you?" He sighed, the way businessmen sigh when they're done negotiating. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Harder. That word echoed like a hammer against my ribs. 43 years of raising him, working double shifts, building this damn house plank by plank, and suddenly I was making his life hard. Melissa appeared behind him, dressed like she was going to lunch at some country club. Her perfume came before her voice, sweet and poisonous. "Henry, it's really for the best. The doctor said stress isn't good for you, and Daniel's business." "Daniel's business?" I cut her off. "This house is his business. You both live here because Margaret and I paid for every inch of it." Her smile faltered, but Daniel didn't even flinch. He just turned away and picked up the car keys from the counter. "Pack what you need. Melissa will drive you to a place where you'll be comfortable." I stared at him. For a moment, the silence between us was unbearable, a lifetime of words unsaid, respect unreturned, love forgotten. Then something broke inside me. I slammed my hand on the table so hard that the coffee mug fell and shattered. "You ungrateful bastard," I shouted. "Your mother would be ashamed of what you've become." That was the last time I saw him that morning. He didn't look back. He didn't say goodbye. He just left me standing there, in the house that used to echo with laughter and now smelled of betrayal. Melissa showed up half an hour later with the car running. She waited at the door, tapping her nails against her phone screen, not even pretending to care. I walked through the hallway slowly, looking at the photos, Margaret's smile frozen in time, Daniel's graduation picture, the Christmas tree we once decorated together. I felt like a ghost in my own home. 2 suitcases, that's all I took. 43 years of life reduced to 2 pieces of luggage. When I stepped outside, the sun was too bright. I could barely see. Melissa didn't speak the entire drive, not until we stopped at a rundown motel off the highway, a place called Sunrise Inn. The irony stung like salt. She reached into her purse and pulled out $200 in cash, dropped it in my hand like charity. "There. This should help you get settled," she said flatly. "We'll be in touch." No goodbye, no glance, not even a flicker of guilt, just the sound of the car door slamming and the tires spitting gravel as she drove off. The room smelled of mildew and dust. The wallpaper peeled at the corners. The mattress dipped like it had carried the weight of too many broken souls. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my hands. The same hands that once held Margaret's, that built furniture, that signed Daniel's first tuition check. I thought of her, of the way she used to rest her head on my shoulder and whisper, "Don't ever let anyone make you feel small, Henry." And then, like a whisper from the grave, another memory surfaced, her showing me a folder once, years ago. "In case anything ever happens to me," she had said, "keep it safe." For the first time since Daniel's words, I felt something other than humiliation. It was faint, like a match struck in a storm, but it was there. Suspicion. Margaret had left more than memories. She had left truth. Maybe I wasn't as powerless as they thought. Have you ever been treated like a burden by someone you loved with all your heart? The morning I left Savannah, the air was heavy with salt and old promises. The bus station smelled of diesel and despair, a strange perfume for a man who'd lost everything. I carried my 2 suitcases and a paper bag with a sandwich I couldn't eat. Every bump on the road to Charleston rattled through my bones like a reminder that I was, at least for now, still alive. I hadn't seen Gregory Lowell in over a decade. He was Margaret's lawyer back then, precise, distant but reliable, the kind of man who never said more than necessary. As the bus crossed the long bridge into Charleston, I wondered if he'd even remember me. Part of me hoped he wouldn't. Part of me hoped he'd forgotten the old man whose family had turned its back on him. His office sat in a restored brick building downtown, between a law firm and a bakery. When I stepped in, the smell of paper and lemon polish hit me like a memory of order and control. A young assistant looked up from her desk. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" "No," I said, gripping my hat. "But tell Mr. Lowell that Henry Malcolm Carter is here." It took less than a minute. He came out of his office personally, the same thin frame, silver hair neatly combed back, eyes like pale glass, sharp, analytical. But when he saw me, something softened. "Henry," he said quietly. "Good God, man, it's been years. What brings you here?" I told him everything, almost everything, about Daniel, about being thrown out, about the house, the cash, the humiliation. He didn't interrupt once, just listened, fingers steepled beneath his chin. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "I see," he murmured. "And your son claims you no longer own the property?" "He said Margaret left everything to him," I replied. "Said the will was clear." He rose from his chair. "Wait here." The minutes that followed were long and silent. The tick of the clock on the wall felt like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. When Gregory returned, he carried a thick file, yellowed at the edges. He laid it on the desk and opened it with surgical precision. "Henry," he said finally, adjusting his glasses, "your wife left 70% of all assets to you. The remainder to your son, under specific conditions." My pulse stumbled. "Conditions?" He nodded. "Yes, your wife was a meticulous woman. There's a clause here. If Daniel ever displays gross disrespect, neglect, or exploitation toward you, he forfeits his inheritance entirely. The estate reverts to you." I just stared at him, my throat closing. "You're saying he lied?" "I'm saying," Gregory said, voice even but firm, "that Daniel Carter has committed fraud and possibly elder abuse." The words struck deeper than any insult. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The shame that had weighed me down since that morning in Savannah turned into something colder. Purpose. Gregory closed the file and looked directly at me. "Mr. Carter, do you still have access to your identification? Banking documents?" "Yes," I said. "They're in my suitcase." "Good. Because from this moment on, we're not victims. We're witnesses, and we're going to set the record straight." For the first time in weeks, I felt the ground solid beneath my feet. He started making calls, to the bank, to the county clerk, to the state police. His tone never changed. Professional, controlled, absolute. The kind of tone that doesn't ask for justice. It enforces it. Hours passed in a blur of signatures, scanned documents, and official voices echoing through the speakerphone. At one point, Gregory turned to me and said, "Your wife trusted me with her final wishes. I intend to honor that, Henry. To the letter." When evening came, I walked out of that office with a new truth pressing against my chest. Margaret hadn't abandoned me. She had protected me, even from beyond the grave. On the sidewalk, I looked up at the amber sky. The world still looked cruel, but now it also looked winnable. My son had taken my home, my dignity, my peace. But unknowingly, he had handed me something far greater, the law, and I intended to use it. Operation began before sunrise, not with sirens, but with the steady pulse of fax machines, notarized seals, and Gregory's voice cool as steel. He had me sit across from him with my suitcases open, IDs laid out like a veteran's medals, passport, driver's license, social security card, marriage certificate. He checked every name, every date, every signature against Margaret's will, then moved through the morning like a chess player who'd studied the board for years. "Henry," he said, sliding a legal pad toward me, "confirm these details. Full legal name, date of birth, prior addresses." His pen moved without hesitation. He wasn't merely doing paperwork, he was preparing artillery. At 7:14 a.m., he called the bank's estate division on speaker. "This is Attorney Gregory H. Lowell, bar number—" His cadence never broke. "We have a breach of fiduciary duty and a probable incident of elder financial abuse. Immediate action is warranted." He read the clause in Margaret's will word for word, the one about gross disrespect and forfeiture. Hearing it aloud made my skin prickle. My wife had written those words with purpose, for me. By 8:03, the first dam broke. The bank placed a provisional freeze on accounts tied to Daniel's companies, any lines of credit collateralized by marital assets, and, this was the quiet thunder, his personal cards. The manager's voice was clinical. "Pending further verification, all outward transactions will be suspended." Gregory thanked him, hung up, and immediately dialed the county recorder to flag property transfers. Then the state consumer protection hotline. Then a detective in Savannah he seemed to know by profession, if not by name. Methodical, unemotional, irrefutable. I sat very still, like an old tree in a storm that for once seemed to be bending in my favor. The clock on the wall ticked in even strokes, steady as breath. On Gregory's desk, Margaret's file sat open like a compass. My hands didn't shake anymore. At 9:26, he turned to me. "We'll need a statement. Factual. No embellishment." I told the story as it happened. The doorway, Daniel's voice, Melissa's perfume, the $200, the motel with its peeling wallpaper. He typed, paused only to ask for times, addresses, whether anyone else was present. "We work in facts, Henry," he said, not unkindly. "They carry farther than fury." Somewhere around 10, my phone lit up with a message from a number I didn't recognize. "Call me." Then another. "Urgent." Then a third drawn-out text, the kind you can hear breathing. I ignored them. Gregory didn't even glance at my phone. He was finishing a letter to the bank's legal department. His printer hummed like a distant motorboat. By late morning, the ripples reached Savannah. The first call came not from Daniel, but from a manager at one of his developments. A voicemail, strained and polite. "Mr. Carter, sir, there are issues with payroll and utilities. Mr. Daniel asked if you could—" The message cut off. Another came minutes later, panicked. "Power just shut off at the River Street office. The card was declined. We have clients coming in an hour." Then Daniel called. His name on my screen jolted something in my chest. Old muscle memory misfiring. I put it on speaker so Gregory could hear. "Dad," Daniel said, voice pitched low like we were co-conspirators. "There's been a misunderstanding. The bank froze our accounts. A big mistake. I'm fixing it, but I need you to confirm a few things with them. It's just paperwork." I stared at the phone. The same mouth that had told me to go wait for the end now sounded warm, almost tender. I felt the heat rise in my face. "A mistake," I repeated. "Right," he said quickly. "We're family. We can sort this out." I've taken care of you, haven't I? The house, You threw me out, I said, each word placed like a brick. You told me to find a place to die. There was a pause. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted by a fraction, sweetness curdling to impatience. Dad, I was under stress, deals falling through. I shouldn't have said it. Look, Melissa will drive you back home if that's what you want. We'll fix it together. Gregory nodded subtly, a conductor cueing a single trumpet. I exhaled. Do you remember your mother's clause, Daniel? I asked. The one about dignity? Silence, then a brittle laugh. Come on, there's no clause like that. Who told you? The law, I said. And your mother. From beyond the grave. When I ended the call, my hand trembled not with fear, but with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Gregory, expression neutral, pressed a button to record a summary memo. Client was contacted by subject Daniel Carter at approximately 11:07 a.m., he dictated. Subject attempted to persuade client to intervene with financial institutions following lawful freeze. Client declined. Noon brought movement. A detective from Savannah returned Gregory's call. We put him on speaker. Mr. Lowell, he said, we've reviewed your preliminary report. We will open an investigation into potential elder abuse and fiduciary misconduct. He asked me a handful of questions, simple and exact. I answered them, my voice steady. When we hung up, I felt taller than my chair. Reports went out to state regulators, notices to banks, a notarized letter to the utility companies flagging suspected fraud. Gregory moved like a metronome, and time followed him. Outside, the Charleston light shifted from pale pearl to bright brass. But inside that office, it felt like the weather was finally taking instructions. At 1:42 p.m., Melissa called. Her voice had none of the lacquer from that morning at the motel. It was thin, frayed. "Henry, darling," she began, then immediately pivoted. "You can't do this to us. Do you know how many people depend on Daniel? You'll ruin his reputation." "His reputation?" I said. "He ruined mine." She exhaled sharply. "We all say things we don't mean. Couples, families, hurt people hurt people. You know how grief works, Henry. Margaret would want you to forgive." I closed my eyes, saw Margaret's smile, felt the soft weight of her head against my shoulder the night she whispered not to let anyone make me small. "Forgiveness is not a coupon code," I said. "You don't enter it and get everything back for free." I ended the call. Gregory slid me a glass of water like a quiet award. In the afternoon, the stories started to arrive like weather reports. A supplier said Daniel's corporate card had been declined in front of a showroom full of sales reps. He'd smiled too wide and said there must be a network issue. A leasing agent texted me, not Daniel, asking if the temporary hiccup would affect tenants. Somewhere in Savannah's historic district, a restaurant reservation under Carter had been cancelled when the deposit failed, and the hostess, bored and omniscient, told the valet, who told the bartender, who told the world. So much of reputation is smoke until you open all the windows at once. The detective called back at 4:10. "We've pulled prior complaints," he said, voice tightening. "Your son has unresolved tax irregularities. This strengthens probable cause." He asked if I would be willing to provide copies of financial statements, any texts, any voicemails. I said yes to everything and added, because it felt necessary, "He is still my son." The detective's tone softened. "Understood, sir. The law will address the behavior, not erase the blood." As the sun lowered, the office turned golden. Dust motes drifted like patient snow. Gregory printed the final set of letters, slid them into envelopes, and lined them up as neatly as prayer books. He capped his pen and looked at me for a long beat. "Today," he said, "we reintroduced consequences into a space that had become accustomed to none." I nodded. a tight motion that used new muscles. "Thank you." He shook his head once. "Thank your wife. She wrote the map." I left his office at dusk, the air warm and salted from the harbour. My phone buzzed again. I let it. When I reached the street corner, I stopped and listened, to car horns, to the gulls, to my own breath. The humiliation that had wrapped me like a wet coat was gone. In its place was a garment I hadn't worn in years, authority. As I waited for the crosswalk, Daniel called once more. I answered, because endings deserve witnesses. "Dad," he said, voice controlled and desperate at once, "listen to me. This has gone too far. Everyone's panicking, clients, staff. Melissa is in tears. Please, call the bank. Tell them it's a misunderstanding." I thought about all the ways a father says yes over the years. Yes to ice cream before dinner. Yes to staying up late. Yes to signing the loan. How each yes builds a son who expects the next one as if it were gravity itself. My mouth felt dry. "I'm not calling the bank," I said. "I'm calling this what it is. You crossed a line." I drew breath. The evening hummed. "And because of your mother's clause on dignity, you just gave me everything that was left." He was silent long enough for the light to change. When he spoke, the mask had cracked. "You have no idea what you're doing." I stepped off the curb, feeling the ground hold me up. "For once," I said, "I do." That night, back in my room at the motel, the mildew didn't seem so loud. The neon hum outside my window sounded like a lullaby tuned to a better station. My phone buzzed with one last message. Not from Daniel, not from Melissa, but from the detective. Formal investigation opened. Suspected fraud and elder abuse. I set the phone face down and stared at the ceiling. The law wasn't love, and it wasn't mercy, but it was a spine. And I had one again. The arrest came like thunder on a clear night, sudden, sharp, and impossible to ignore. I was sitting in the motel lobby, sipping weak coffee from a paper cup, when the television above the counter flashed breaking news. Local developer Daniel Carter arrested during dinner at the historic district. The image that filled the screen nearly made me drop the cup. There he was, my son, in a tailored navy suit, surrounded by police officers in dark windbreakers. The restaurant behind him shimmered with chandeliers and half-eaten steaks. Patrons stared, phones raised, capturing his downfall in pixels and gasps. Melissa stood beside him, her perfect hair collapsing under the weight of flashing cameras, shouting something that never reached the microphones. The anchor's voice was calm, almost bored. "Carter and his wife are being detained on suspicion of financial fraud and elder exploitation. Authorities confirm that a full investigation is underway." I sat back, the world suddenly quieter than I'd ever known it. Outside, the motel sign flickered. Sunrise Inn. Its irony now complete. For weeks, I had woken up feeling buried. That morning, it felt like someone had started to dig me out. My phone buzzed non-stop. Calls from unknown numbers, messages from reporters. I ignored them all. Justice didn't need an audience, it only needed endurance. That evening, Gregory called. "It's done," he said simply. "They'll be processed tonight. You'll receive official confirmation in the morning." I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I just whispered, "Thank you," and set the phone down. Sleep came early that night, dreamless and heavy, the kind of sleep that only comes after years of being awake. The next morning, a car waited for me outside the motel. Not a police car, not a limousine, just a modest black sedan sent by Gregory's office. The driver handed me a sealed envelope. Inside, a court order, temporary possession reinstated. My name, written in bold legal print. Henry Malcolm Carter, sole owner, 412 Whitaker Street. The ride back to Savannah was slow, almost reverent. The live oaks leaned over the road, their branches like old witnesses whispering about time. The house appeared at the end of the lane, same white wood, same porch columns, only now it looked smaller, or maybe I had grown taller. The porch steps creaked under my weight. The lock turned stiffly, as if the door had been holding its breath, waiting for me. The scent of dust and old air hit me first, but beneath it lingered something faint and familiar. Margaret's perfume, lavender, subtle and haunting. I walked through each room in silence. The kitchen, still with the dent in the counter where she once dropped a cast-iron pan. The hallway, lined with pictures of birthdays and Christmas mornings, all smiles, all lies now framed in regret. In the living room, the armchair where Margaret used to read was still turned toward the window. I ran my hand along its back, felt the threadbare fabric under my fingers, and let the air fill with memories. Upstairs, Melissa's perfumes, purses, and jewelry boxes still cluttered the dresser. I gathered them into a single suitcase, neatly, without anger, and carried it outside. The wind lifted my hair as I set it on the porch and locked the door behind me. For a moment, I stood there, breathing. The same sun that once burned my humiliation now warmed my victory, quiet and complete. When I went back inside, I sat in Margaret's chair. The late afternoon light slanted through the curtains, painting stripes of gold across the floorboards. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was earned. Gregory called again, around dusk. "Daniel's facing multiple charges," he said. "Fraud, tax evasion, elder abuse. He'll be held until the preliminary hearing." I nodded, though he couldn't see it. "And Melissa?" "Accessory to fraud, released on bail. She won't be back." "Good," I said softly. Then after a pause, "You know, Gregory, I used to think justice was about revenge." He was quiet for a moment. "And now?" "Now I think it's about restoration, putting things back where they belong." We ended the call. I poured myself a small glass of whiskey, the kind Margaret used to buy for Christmas. The liquid caught the light like molten amber. I raised it toward the empty room. "To you, Maggie," I whispered. "You were right. Dignity always costs something, but it's worth the price." The phone buzzed again. Reporters probably, but I let it ring. I didn't need the world's applause, just the quiet sound of the house breathing again, alive, honest, mine. Outside, crickets began their steady rhythm. The porch light flickered on, and the evening smelled of pine and rain-soaked wood. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Home." And for the first time in a long time, the word didn't hurt. The knock came just after noon, sharp and deliberate, the kind of sound made by someone who expected obedience. Through the glass of the front door I saw her silhouette, tall, elegant, perfectly still. When I opened it, Eleanor Whitford stepped inside as if she still owned the air I breathed. "Mr. Carter," she said, removing her sunglasses with a slow, theatrical grace. Her voice carried the polished authority of someone who'd never been told no. "You've certainly made quite a spectacle of things." She looked around the living room, her gaze scanning the details, the freshly dusted shelves, the photographs of Margaret, the absence of her daughter's perfume. Her lips curved into something between pity and disdain. "It's smaller than I remembered," she said. "Or maybe it's just that success makes everything else seem quaint." "Can I help you, Mrs. Whitford?" I asked, my tone even. I didn't offer her a seat. She ignored the question, stepping closer to the window, the sun glinting off the diamonds on her wrist. "You've caused quite a mess," she said, turning to face me. "Daniel and Melissa are, well, let's just say their lives are in ruins. The press won't leave our family alone. Do you have any idea what kind of damage you've done?" I met her gaze without blinking. "They did the damage themselves." Eleanor gave a soft, humorless laugh. "Oh, please. You're an old man. You think you understand the world, but you don't. Everyone manipulates the system, Mr. Carter. Some of us just do it more elegantly." She opened her handbag and drew out a white envelope. Thick, pristine, deliberate. She laid it on the coffee table as if placing a royal decree. $5 million, cash, wired discreetly to any account you choose. In exchange, you'll sign a statement requesting that the investigation be dropped. A misunderstanding, perhaps, a family dispute blown out of proportion. The number hit the air like a loaded gun, but I didn't move. I just looked at the envelope, then back at her. "You think you can buy decency?" I said quietly. "I can buy silence," she replied, her voice like cut glass. "And in this world, silence is worth far more than decency." She leaned forward, lowering her tone to something almost intimate. "Let me be blunt. The house, the estate, the inheritance, none of it will bring your wife back. Margaret was a complicated woman, Mr. Carter. There are things about her you may not know. Deals, associations, names that appear on the wrong documents." Her eyes gleamed. "Wouldn't it be a shame if the press found out that her legacy wasn't as clean as everyone believed?" For a moment, I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Margaret's face flashed in my mind, her laughter, her meticulous handwriting, the folder she once handed me years ago. In case anything ever happens to me. A memory that now pulsed with meaning. Eleanor saw the hesitation. She pressed harder. "You see, even you're not sure what she was involved in. That's why I'm offering you this chance to end it quietly. Take the money. Step away. Live out your years in peace. You deserve that, don't you?" I took a slow breath, the kind that fills a man before a decision that will echo. "I don't want your money," I said. Her smile froze. "Don't be foolish. This isn't charity. It's mercy." "Mercy," I repeated, tasting the word like ash. I took a step forward, just enough for her to feel it. "You came into my home after your daughter and my son tried to rob and humiliate me, and you talk about mercy? You insult my wife's memory, and you expect gratitude?" Eleanor straightened, her composure tightening like a corset. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Oh, I think I do," I said softly. "You're the kind of person who's spent so long buying control that you've forgotten what real power looks like." "And what does real power look like, Mr. Carter?" she asked, her voice dripping disdain. "Knowing when not to sell your soul," I said. The silence that followed was heavy, thick enough to touch. She stared at me for several seconds, searching for a crack in my expression. There was none. Finally, she snatched the envelope from the table and slipped it back into her bag with a sharp flick of her wrist. "You'll regret this," she said. "There are truths better left buried." I met her gaze one last time. "Then maybe it's time to start digging." Her heels struck the hardwood like gunshots as she left. The door clicked shut behind her, and for a long moment I stood in the echo of her perfume, expensive, suffocating, fading by the second. When I finally exhaled, the tension slid off my shoulders like armor being set down. The house felt cleaner somehow, the air lighter. I looked toward Margaret's photo on the mantel and whispered, "They still think they can scare me with shadows, but I'm not afraid of the dark anymore." I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the sunlight shift across the floor. Somewhere in the distance, thunder murmured. Not of storms, but of something breaking open. I didn't know what secrets Margaret might have left behind, but one thing was certain. I was done being a man others could silence. If Eleanor Whitford wanted to play power games, she had just met someone who no longer played by their rules. The house had a smell that afternoon. Dust warming in the sun, old cedar, and the faint lingering lavender of Margaret's favorite soap. I pulled the attic cord and climbed into heat and shadows. Boxes sat like sleeping animals, taped with Margaret's neat handwriting. Receipts, insurance, letters. I opened the one marked MISC and found papers that didn't belong to our life. Cashier's checks, photocopies of contracts, deposits made to companies I didn't recognize. The names sounded like fiction. Grey Line Partners, Blue Span Holdings, Port Regent LLC. Addresses pointed to P.O. boxes or shared workspace floors in buildings I'd never set foot in. I carried the box downstairs and cleared the dining table. Light fell across the documents in slanted gold. The checks had memo lines that were either blank or stuffed with phrases that meant nothing. Consulting, facilitation, retainer. A ledger contained dates and amounts that seemed to move in loops, money leaving one account only to reappear the following week under another name. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingers as I traced the ink. Margaret's initials appeared in the corners of several pages, precise, discreet, unmistakable. I called Gregory. He listened, then said, "You need a specialist. I'll text you a number." Minutes later, my phone lit up with a name. Raymond Knox, Investigations. Former federal agent, clean reputation, no theatrics. I reached him that evening. His voice was low, unhurried. "Mr. Carter, I can meet tomorrow, no obligation. Bring nothing you wouldn't show a judge." He arrived the next day as the heat began to soften. Mid-50s, tall but undecorated, a lined face that looked like it had forgotten how to lie. He wore a plain suit, no tie, and carried a thin leather folio. On the porch he paused and looked at the house as if it were a witness. When I opened the door, he didn't offer a smile. He offered attention. "Mr. Carter," he said, "I'm sorry for what brought me here." We sat at the dining table. I slid the documents across to him. He put on glasses, glanced through the first 5 pages, and I saw it, a small narrowing of the eyes, a map coming into focus. "Who else has seen these?" he asked. "Just me. And now you." He nodded, then began to separate the papers into quiet piles. "Shells," he said finally, tapping the stack on the left. "These are holding companies with no real staff, borrowed addresses, likely fronts." Another pile. "Pass-throughs. They exist to move money from A to B to C, so the original source goes fuzzy." He held up a cashier's check to the light. "And this is the old-fashioned perfume they spray on the mess so it smells clean." My mouth was dry. "Are you telling me my wife was a criminal?" He didn't answer right away. He aligned the papers again, as if order itself might protect me. "I'm telling you, these documents point to laundering structures. Whoever handled them knew what they were looking at. The amounts are large, the timing is careful, the signatures disciplined." He set the check down. "It doesn't prove intent, but it suggests involvement." The room seemed smaller, the air heavier. Margaret's face floated in my mind. Not the face on the mantel, but the face across 1,000 breakfasts. The woman who corrected my grammar with a smile. The woman who kissed her finger and pressed it to the spines of books. "Raymond," I said, and my voice surprised me, too soft for the weight of the words. "If this money is dirty, then my inheritance is a trap." "Possibly," he said, "or there's another explanation, but the pattern is wrong." He pointed to a column of deposits. "See how these amounts break just below mandatory reporting thresholds? That's structuring. See how they bounce between entities before landing in a real estate escrow? Classic pipeline." Something inside me sank, then hardened. "Tell me what to do." He leaned back, hands folded. "First, we do not destroy or alter anything. Second, we catalog dates, amounts, originating accounts, destinations. Third, I make discreet inquiries, not to friends but to systems. Fourth," he paused. "Fourth, we assume that anyone who stands to lose here will try to control you." "You mean Daniel and Melissa?" He didn't flinch. "I mean anyone who thinks you don't know what you have, your son and daughter-in-law included." I felt a pulse of heat behind my eyes. She was a teacher, I whispered. If she got pulled into this, why wouldn't she tell me? Raymond's gaze softened by a fraction. People keep secrets to protect, to survive, to win time. He slid one document closer. This signature, Margaret's initials. It appears only on cover pages or receipt acknowledgements, never on the originating contracts. It could mean distance. It could mean she was documenting, not directing. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe in a version of my life that didn't collapse under the weight of these papers. But the ledger sat there with its columns and its dates, and faith felt thin. We worked for hours. He photographed each page with a small, flat scanner, labeling by date and category. He never asked me to leave the room. He never touched a paper without telling me why. When we finished, the table looked like a courtroom. As he packed up, he said, 2 more things. 1, this money, if tainted, may already be on a federal radar. If it is, you will want to be the one who knocks first. 2, rumors are currency. If Eleanor came to you talking about Margaret's reputation, she didn't invent that leverage today. I told him about Eleanor's visit, the envelope, her threats dressed in jewels. He listened without expression. She'll try again, he said. Not with money next time, but with compromise. She'll dangle a story, help us tidy this up, and we'll help your wife's name rest in peace. Don't bargain. If this goes federal, the only currency that buys immunity is truth. I walked him to the door. The evening had turned indigo at the edges. Cicadas had started their electric chorus. He paused at the porch steps. Mr. Carter, he said, I've dealt with men who lie for a living. Your son's first call to you, the tone, the pivot, the appeal to family, it was professional manipulation. He has used you because fathers are built to forgive. He tugged at his cuff, not a fidget, a ritual. Don't pick up the next call alone. He left without promising happy endings. He left me with something better, a plan. After he was gone, I sat again at the table and found my hands resting on the ledger. The ink was dry and fearless. Margaret's initials looked back at me like a test I hadn't studied for. A gust moved the curtains. The room sighed. I heard my own breath, rougher than usual. I thought of the morning Daniel told me to wait for the end, and I felt the old ache of humiliation try to climb my throat. It didn't reach my mouth, because another memory rose in its place, Margaret placing a folder into my hands years ago. In case anything ever happens to me. Back then I thought it was about the house, the life insurance, the what if. Now I could see it clearer. She had been building a map, maybe of crime, maybe of the people who pretended to own it, maybe of the way out. I turned off the lights, leaving only the lamp by her chair. The room fell into quiet halves, shadow and gold. I crossed to the mantel and touched the glass of her photograph. The eyes I knew stared past me into some fixed distance I couldn't see. If there are ghosts here, I said, let them be honest. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. I watched it light and fade, then light again. I didn't answer. I knew what came next. Threats shaped like favors, promises dressed as absolution. I went to bed with the ledger still on the table and the house listening. In the morning, Raymond called. His voice carried the crisp edge of a man who'd been awake before dawn. Preliminary confirmation, he said. Some of those entities connect to prior federal cases. This isn't local. And Henry, your son and Melissa know enough to be dangerous. Expect contact. They'll pitch cooperation as salvation. Blackmail, I said. They'll call it family, he replied. When the call ended, I stood at the window and watched the street breathe. Dog walkers, a cyclist gliding past the oaks, the mail truck pausing like a metronome. The world looked ordinary. My life did not. I felt a cold patience settle into my bones, the kind of patience that outlasts storms. If there was rot in the foundation of our fortune, I would tear up boards until I saw daylight. If there was a story stitched around Margaret's name, I would unpick it, thread by thread. And if Daniel called to sell me a way out, I would answer in a language he had never learned, the truth that cannot be bought. The call came collect from the county detention center. A robotic voice read my name like a warning, then clicked, and there was Daniel, smaller somehow, crammed into the space between static and shame. "Dad," he said, low and measured, the voice he used to close deals. "Don't hang up, please." I didn't answer. You can hear a man better when you leave room for his fear. He filled it fast. "This is all a misunderstanding that exploded. Lawyers feeding on smoke. We can fix it. Together." "Together," I said, tasting how hollow the word had become. "I've been talking to people," he rushed on. "There's a way to cooperate. If you and I go to the police with a unified statement, they'll ease off. We say it's a family conflict. We provide context." "Context," I repeated. "Like the morning you told me to go wait for the end." A pause, a single hinge squeaking. Then the pivot. "I was wrong," he said, softening like butter. "I was drowning, deals turning, pressure from investors. I snapped. That wasn't me talking. You know me." I stared at the kitchen wall, at the tiny fissure in the paint above the stove, a hairline crack that had been there for years. I'd always meant to fix it. The house keeps your truths in places you forget to look. "What do you want, Daniel?" I asked. He exhaled, chosen vulnerability. "An agreement. If you help me, I can help you. I know things about the money, about Mom's associates. I can make it clean. I have files, emails. I can lead them where they want to go. We present it as a coordinated effort, father and son facing a complicated past. If you do this, the DA will cut a deal, probation, maybe a fine. We both keep a share and move on." He said, "Keep a share," like he was offering me a blanket in winter. My fingers tightened around the phone. "Keep a share of what?" He hesitated, a slip inside the smoothness. "Of the estate. Of the holdings. You don't need it all at your age. I can invest it right. We rebuild. We heal." There it was, the old scaffolding beneath the apology. The expectation that I would fold out of habit, that fatherhood would override memory. "You're proposing that I help you cooperate with the same police investigating you for exploiting me," I said. "And in exchange, we split what your mother left me." "Not split," he corrected gently. "Optimize. Protect. And if I say no, silence, then the new mask. Dad, there are files you don't want public. Names, transfers. If this goes wrong, it won't just be me and Melissa. Mom's reputation. My wife's reputation doesn't bend to your bargaining table," I said. "It never did." His breath ticked against the line. "You're making a mistake." "I've made them before," I said. "I learned." I hung up before he could find another tone. The house sagged into quiet. The late light had the color of brass, cooling on an anvil. I stood there until my heartbeat slowed enough to pass for human, then dialed Raymond. He picked up on the second ring. "Carter." "He called," I said. "Jail phone. He offered cooperation and a share. He implied leverage about Margaret. Files. Emails." Raymond didn't sigh. The air around his voice simply compressed. "Predictable," he said. "They always pivot to, 'help me help you.'" "Did he specify what he'd give law enforcement?" "Vague." "He wants me on record suggesting it was a family misunderstanding." "That would contaminate your credibility," Raymond said, "and paint you as a party to any minimization strategy. You didn't bite?" I hung up. "Good," he said. "Now we move." "Move where?" "To first position," he replied. "We go to the feds before your son does." We disclose what you have and what you've been offered. We offer full cooperation, not as a bargaining chip, but as posture. A citizen wanting clarity. If there's rot in the money, you say it aloud. If there isn't, you've still burned the blackmail currency by turning on the lights. I ran a hand over the countertop, felt the old nicks, the history baked into wood. Will they listen? They listen to sequence, Raymond said. Who came first, who came clean, and they listen to paper, which you have. What about Daniel's files? If they exist, we'll surface them legally, he said. But we don't let him define the terms, we define them. He told me to meet him at dawn. Wear something you can sit in for hours, he said. Bring only what we catalogued, no extras. That night, I barely slept. Not because of fear, because of a low, focused current running through me like a wire. I wrote notes in block letters on a yellow pad, dates, names, the envelope, Eleanor's threats. I wrote the sentence I would open with if they asked me why I was there. Because truth used to live in this house, and I want it back. At first light, the city was a hush of sprinklers and newsstands yawning open. Raymond drove. Downtown buildings rose like file cabinets. He parked 2 blocks from the federal building, as if ethics had a walking distance. Inside, the security line moved with the patience of bureaucracy. Raymond placed the folio in the tray, his movements precise, almost ceremonial. We checked in with a receptionist who had the gaze of someone who had seen every flavor of emergency. "Agent Marsh will see you," she said. "Room 3B. Room 3B smelled like coffee that had worked hard and lost. A woman in her 40s entered with a tablet and a face like clear weather. "Mr. Carter, Mr. Knox," she said. "I'm Special Agent Claire Marsh." She didn't sit until we did. I told her everything, not with theatrics, not with tears. Just the facts, arranged like bricks. The eviction, the motel, the will, the clause, the freeze, the arrests, Eleanor's visit, the envelope of bribery, the attic boxes, the shell companies, the ledger entries split to duck reporting thresholds, the call from my son offering cooperation in exchange for narrative and money. While I spoke, she asked only to clarify a date or a spelling. When I finished, she looked at me for a long second that felt like weighing. "Mr. Carter," she said, "do you believe your wife knowingly engaged in criminal activity?" The room tightened. The answer that wanted to leap from my throat was no. The answer that belonged in this room was different. "I believe my wife documented something," I said. "Whether that was participation or evidence, I don't know. I want to." Agent Marsh nodded. "Honest," she said. "That matters." She tapped her tablet. "Some of the entities you mentioned have appeared in prior inquiries. Your son's name intersects with other subjects of interest. The clause in the will is unusual, protective." She glanced at Raymond. "Mr. Knox, your preliminary assessment aligns with patterns we've seen." Raymond gave one of his small, almost shrugs. "It's a familiar smell." Agent Marsh folded her hands. "There is a path here. If you consent, we will formally receive your documents, preserve chain of custody, and evaluate. Separately, we will document the attempted bribe and your son's call as potential obstruction and coercion. If, during the course of this, the subjects reach out again seeking to shape your statement, we would like to be present for that contact." "You mean record it," I said. "We mean document it," she replied. "Legally." I looked at Raymond. He looked at me. For weeks I had been reacting. Now I felt the floor move under my feet in a way that steadied rather than swayed. "Yes," I said. "You can have everything, and if they call, you can listen." She slid a form across the table. Consent, chain of custody language that felt like walking a plank over water that for once might actually hold you. I signed. My name looked different, firmer, sober. When we stood to leave, Agent Marsh said, "One more thing, Mr. Carter. If your son requests a meeting on neutral ground, a reconciliation, an exchange of information, do not go alone. Call us first." I wasn't planning to go alone, I said. Not anymore. We stepped back into daylight. The air had the clean edge of something sharpened. Raymond didn't speak until we were a block away. You did well, he said, which in his language meant you crossed a river and didn't look back. My phone buzzed before noon, a voice message from a blocked number. Daniel again, speaking through clenched composure. Dad, let's talk face to face, he said. Just you and me. We can end this. I have documents to show you. It's time to fix the narrative. I forwarded the message to Raymond. Seconds later, his reply, we accept. On our terms. By evening, the plan had a skeleton, a location that wasn't mine, wasn't his. A time that wasn't desperate, a room with good light and quiet corners, and somewhere just outside the line of sight, the government watching the story write itself. I stood at the window as darkness gathered between the oaks and thought about prey and hunters, about fathers and sons, about the currencies men trade when they run out of truth. I remembered the day Daniel learned to ride a bike. My hand on the back of the seat, his voice high with fear, the moment he found balance and looked back to see I'd let go. I hadn't let go, I realized. For years I'd been running behind him, breathless, steadying what he should have learned to steer. That ended now. If there was a game of blackmail, I had replaced the board. If there was a meeting, it would be witnessed. If there was a story, it would not be told in whispers. That night, I placed Margaret's photo on the dining table beside the ledger and said, tomorrow, I stop asking what you hid and start proving what you knew. The house listened. The dark held. Somewhere far off, thunder muttered like a gavel nudging the day to finish. I went to bed without fear, not because I trusted outcomes, because I finally trusted my footing. The next move would not be theirs. It would be mine. Raymond arrived an hour before the meeting with a thin black case and a face that told me nothing would be left to chance. He opened the case on my dining table, a small transmitter the size of a matchbox, 2 lapel mics, a pen that was not a pen. He checked his watch, then the windows, then the porch, as if air could betray us. Clip this under your collar, he said, handing me the first mic. If you scratch your ear, we'll know you're okay. If you say the word porch light, we terminate. He nodded at the second device. This backs up the first. Redundancy isn't paranoia, it's just honest. Special Agent Claire Marsh and another Agent Vargas did a quick walkthrough. Marsh's voice was all business, no drama. We'll be outside, line of sight to the front door. Our team is staged on the block. Your job is to talk. Ask questions that require a yes. Ask about the money, the will, the bribe, pressure to shape your statement. Stay factual. We want clean admissions. If anyone makes a threat, keep them talking. Do not escalate. I breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth. The house smelled like lemon oil and history. I felt Margaret everywhere, the precise order of the books, the chair angled toward the light like a habit of hope. Today, that hope would have a witness. At exactly 4 p.m., a car rolled up slow, tires whispering over gravel. Through the lace of the curtain, I saw Daniel step out, suit a shade too bright for humility. Melissa followed in a stiff, expensive sheath. She carried a leather folder hugged tight to her ribs, as if it were a newborn. They didn't look at the house, they looked at the performance they thought they were about to give. I opened the door before they could knock. "Come in," I said. "Let's talk." Daniel tried the smile he used on bankers. It looked like it had been ironed on. "Dad," he said, the syllables softening like bait. "Thank you." Melissa's eyes flicked around the room, measuring. "We appreciate your willingness," she said. Willingness to be conned. The subtext hummed. We sat at the dining table. They took the seats where Margaret and I once placed birthday cakes. Melissa set the folder down but didn't open it. Daniel laced his fingers, wedding ring catching the light. For a moment I saw the boy who'd asked me if monsters were real. I remembered answering no. I was wrong. "So," I said, settling in, feeling the small weight of the mic against my skin, "you said you had documents." "Context," Daniel said smoothly. "Emails, timelines, things that establish your intent and ours. If we present this together, the narrative changes. The DA will see a family conflict, not criminality." Melissa leaned in. "There's a statement we drafted. You'd only need to confirm a few points, that the financial decisions were communal, that you were under stress, that no exploitation occurred." I glanced at the folder. "And in exchange," Daniel's smile thinned, "in exchange, we recommend a structured distribution of assets to demonstrate good faith. You retain a significant portion, of course. We propose you release certain claims and accounts to allow operations to resume. That helps everyone." "Everyone," I said. "Like your investors, your lifestyle, like your legacy," Melissa snapped, then recovered. "Like Margaret's name, which is complicated. There are documents—" I let the word sit between us like a stone. "Blackmail." "Don't be dramatic," Daniel said quickly. "We're offering a solution. Cooperate and this stops being a scandal." I looked at him as if I'd never seen him before. Maybe I hadn't. "Explain the solution," I said lightly, "the way you ask a child to show their work." He gestured to the folder. "We signed the statement. You ask the bank to unfreeze. You request the charges be reconsidered. In return, we agree not to disclose certain information that could damage reputations. You and I present a united front. The press calms down. The market stabilizes. We move forward. Certain information like the $5 million your mother offered me to withdraw my complaint," I asked. Melissa's chin flicked. A reflex she tried to turn into a shrug. "A settlement is not a bribe. It's compassion." $5 million in cash, wired discreetly," I said, her words. Silence spread, thin and taut. Daniel leaned in, eyes cool. "Dad, listen. You can either be the fire or the extinguisher. Right now, you're choosing gasoline." I kept my voice quiet. "Who moved the money through Grey Line Partners and Port Regent LLC?" He blinked. Melissa did not. "Names," I said. "I want names from your mouth." He swallowed. "It was Standard. Those are vendor companies for consulting and escrow. Everyone uses them. Everyone who launders," I said. "Did you instruct Melissa to set up pass-throughs?" "She didn't set up anything," he said too fast. "She facilitated. I managed. It was clean." "You just said it was Standard," I replied. "And now it's clean. Which is it?" "I'm offering you peace," he said, the edges fraying. "Take it." "At the motel," I said, "you left me with $200. You told me to find a place to wait for the end. Today, you want to talk about peace." Color climbed his neck. "I said things I regret. You didn't regret using my name to secure lines of credit. You didn't regret signing with a power of attorney you forged and then waved around like a flag," I said. "Did you coerce me to sign anything under duress? Yes or no?" He hesitated, dragged the word out until it became an admission. "We encouraged you." "Did you tell people I was slipping mentally to justify access?" Melissa laughed then, sharp, brittle. "You were sleeping in a motel, Henry. What did you expect us to say? You looked unstable. It was convenient. I let the disgust pass through me and vanish like a wave that breaks and flattens. So you admit you used my supposed instability to influence banks and staff. You admit there were pass-throughs. You admit there was a settlement to stop me from cooperating. And now you want a signed statement saying none of this was exploitation. "Language can be nuanced," Daniel said, all silk again. "It's not about truth, it's about framing. You taught me that when you told me not to correct customers in your shop, remember? Never embarrass a man with precision." I taught you not to humiliate a man for sport, I said, not to steal from him while calling it kindness. Agent Marsh's voice crackled faintly in my ear, tiny as a thought. Perfect. Keep him talking. Daniel's hand hovered over the folder, then landed. He pushed it toward me. Sign, Dad, he said quietly, and I'll make sure the files you're worried about never see daylight. It ends here. What files are those? I asked. Emails, he said. Copies of transfers. Names your wife aligned with. You think the public will care that she was documenting things? They won't. They'll chew her name and spit it out. I can prevent that. He had finally said it out loud. Extortion dressed as filial piety. I closed the folder without opening it. My fingers were steady. No. He stared. Melissa's mouth opened. Shut. In the space of 3 seconds, I watched all the masks shift. The philanthropist, the son, the husband, the victim, until the only thing left was the operator. He rose halfway from his chair, voice low. If you walk away from this table, you destroy your family. My family, I said standing, was destroyed the morning you told me to die somewhere else. The front steps creaked. The porch boards breathed. Through the window the angle of light changed, longer, firmer. Daniel noticed too late that the house had more witnesses than photographs. Agent Marsh's voice, confident now. Now. Footsteps, swift and precise. The front door opened without hurry, like a verdict. Marsh entered first, badge forward, Vargas behind her, and 2 more agents filling the room with the quiet geometry of law. Daniel Carter, Melissa Carter, Marsh said, her tone even as stone. This conversation has been lawfully recorded with the consent of Mr. Henry Carter. You are under arrest for attempted extortion, obstruction, and furtherance of financial fraud, among related charges. Please stand up and place your hands where I can see them. Chaos comes in 2 kinds, the kind that panics and the kind that freezes. Daniel chose the second. Melissa went pale, then red. You can't do this, Daniel said, rising too quickly, hands half raised. This is a private family. Family doesn't exempt you from felony, Marsh said. Vargas moved to cuff him, clean and quick. Melissa jerked back. You set us up, she hissed at me, voice trembling into a higher register I'd never heard. How could you do this to your own family? I felt the room settle around me like a well-fitted coat. The same way you did it to me, I said calmly, only within the law. They took Melissa first. Her bracelet snagged the air with a small, helpless chime. Daniel looked at me over his shoulder as the cuffs clicked. For a second, one narrow second, I saw a boy who had fallen and needed a hand. Then the man returned, eyes hard, jaw clenched. As they led him past the mantel, his gaze flicked to Margaret's photograph. He tried a last line. She wouldn't have wanted this. I met his eyes. She wanted truth, I said. She wrote the clause. The front door opened again. The evening hummed, crickets rising, a car passing, the world refusing to pause for our drama. When the door closed, the quiet was not empty. It was complete. Agent Marsh unclipped the mic from my collar with deft fingers. You did well, Mr. Carter, she said. Very well. I nodded, not trusting my voice. My hands found the back of Margaret's chair, the fabric warm under my palms. Raymond stepped from the porch where he had been a shadow and a sentinel. He didn't smile. He just met my eyes and gave a single spare nod that felt like a medal. After they left, I stood alone in the room and watched the last of the sunlight stripe the floorboards. The house breathed with me. Somewhere down the block, a child laughed. Somewhere closer, the porch light flicked on, steady and simple. I poured water, not whiskey. I sat. I waited for the shaking to come. It didn't. The victory wasn't a roar. It was a return to normal gravity. The floor held. The chair did not collapse. The air was just air again. I looked at Margaret's photo and whispered, "We did it right." For the first time since the motel, my body believed me. They called me back 2 days later. Not a summons, an invitation. "Mr. Carter," Agent Marsh said on the phone, her voice steady as a ruler, "we have updates you should hear in person." She gave me a time, a room number, and the kind of silence that tells a man to bring his courage and leave his guesses at home. The federal building always smells like stapled paper and old coffee. Raymond met me in the lobby. He wore the same unremarkable suit, the same purposeful quiet. We didn't talk in the elevator. There are moments that deserve the dignity of not filling them with noise. Room 4C had no windows, just a table, 3 chairs, and a pitcher of water that made a point of sweating. Agent Marsh entered with a folder thick enough to anchor a boat. Another agent I hadn't met, Hale, stood in the corner, the posture of a man whose job was to remember everything. Marsh sat, opened the folder, and looked at me for a heartbeat that felt like a crossing. "Mr. Carter," she said, "we have reviewed the materials you provided, cross-referenced them with existing cases, and conducted several interviews." She tapped the top page once. "We can now tell you what your wife was doing." My mouth went dry. I nodded. "Margaret Carter," Marsh said, voice level, "was a confidential informant for a joint federal task force investigating money laundering in the real estate sector. She began cooperating 12 years ago, following an incident involving a fraudulent appraisal tied to a school endowment project." She flipped a page. Her cooperation intensified after she was approached to consult on literacy grants that were, in fact, cover channels. She documented transactions, kept ledgers, preserved communications. She was meticulous. The words arranged themselves in the room like furniture that had been there all along, suddenly visible under the right light. Informant, documented, meticulous. My chest tightened, then loosened, then tightened again. Marsh slid a photocopy across the table. "This is her signed CI agreement. Redactions for safety," she said. "Note the date." The black lines couldn't hide the certainty of her handwriting. Margaret's signature, clean, unafraid, sat on the page like a lighthouse. I ran a finger just short of touching it. "She never told me," I said, and my voice sounded like it had walked a long way barefoot. Hale spoke for the first time. "She requested limited disclosure," he said, "to protect you, to protect the integrity of the cases." Marsh continued. "The entities you found, Grey Line, Bluespan, Port Regent, were among the structures under investigation. Some of the deposits into accounts later associated with your assets were government-controlled funds, used to map financial pathways, corroborate participation, and, in some instances, recover assets via structured settlements. Your wife's cooperation led to indictments and forfeitures. The estate she left is not the proceeds of crime, Mr. Carter. It is the sum of lawful assets. Widow's survivor benefits from her teaching career and compensation associated with her assistance." The chair held me up, but barely. For weeks I'd been breathing through a cloth soaked in doubt. Suddenly the cloth was pulled away, and the air was sharp, almost cold. I swallowed it like a man learning to live again. Raymond's hands didn't move, but I felt the relief leave him like steam. "And the threats?" he asked. "The leverage from the Whitford side about secrets?" Marsh's mouth thinned. "Misdirection," she said. "They knew just enough to weaponize ambiguity and not enough to land truth. We have recordings now of attempts to coerce and frame a narrative. Those will stand on their own." I pressed a palm flat on the table to steady the shaking I refused to show. "Did Margaret know where this would lead? To me, here now?" "She knew the risks," Marsh said. "Your wife was very careful." She glanced at the folder, then back at me. "She refused relocation when it was offered. Said she had students to grade and a husband who believes in plain dinners and long walks." A ghost of a smile touched the corner of her mouth and vanished. She kept excellent notes. Her code name was simple: Marsh slid another page toward me. M, as in Margaret. Then softer. As in map. I let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob if it were larger. She gave me a folder years ago, I said. Told me to keep it safe. I thought it was insurance and wills and furnace warranties. I looked up. She was putting a compass in my hands. She trusted you to use it if you ever had to, Marsh said. For a long moment I couldn't speak. I saw her in 100 mundane frames, tying an apron, correcting a comma, washing chalk dust from her wrists. All of it had been true. And behind it, quietly, another truth. The steel of a woman who stood at the edge of a storm and took notes so other people could find the shore. What happens to Daniel and Melissa? I asked finally, the names tasting of old ache. Charges proceed, Marsh said. The attempted extortion and obstruction are new and well documented. The financial crimes are layered, but the evidence is developing. There are also prior irregularities involving your son that predate your wife's death. Those will not help him. And my wife's name? The words came out rough. How do we keep it from being dragged through the street? Marsh leaned forward, elbows on the table, a posture I hadn't seen from her, closer, almost human. You honor it by telling the truth, she said, not loudly or with spectacle, just steadily. When asked, you say, she helped. When pressed, you say, she kept records, and those records helped stop bad men. We will seal what needs sealing, but stories have a way of finding air. When they do, give them oxygen only in the measure of fact. Raymond exhaled, a quiet agreement. Plain talk, he said. It travels. Hale slid a smaller envelope toward me. Copies of exculpatory summaries you can provide to your bank and counsel, he said. They confirm that your assets are not under seizure, that your wife's cooperation was lawful, and that attempts to characterize her as criminal are misinformed. I placed a hand over the envelope like a prayer. My fingers tingled, and I realized how long I'd been bracing for a verdict I couldn't bear. Marsh closed the folder gently, an act that felt like lowering a flag, not in defeat but in completion. There's one more thing, she said. Your wife kept a letter. It was logged with us after her final debrief. It's addressed to you. She opened a side pocket of the folder and withdrew a sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges in the way paper blushes with time. My name was on the front, Henry, in the handwriting I could have recognized in a field of snow. I didn't open it right away. My thumb traced the curve of the H. When I finally slid a finger under the flap, the room shrank to the size of the page. Henry, it read. If you are reading this, it means my careful life met the one risk I could not name. I kept secrets to protect our days, not to remove you from them. I wrote things down because truth, when frightened, needs a lantern. Please forgive the distance I had to keep from you on this one road. I have always been with you in all the others. If they ask you who I was, tell them I was your wife. That is the truest part. Love, M. I folded the letter along the crease her hands had made and set it back in its envelope. My eyes burned, but no tears fell. Some griefs don't spill. They settle and make a man solid. Thank you, I said to the room, to Marsh, to the idea of institutions that occasionally do the right thing, to the woman who had been braver than I knew. Raymond stood. We should go, he said softly. You have a house to reclaim and some repairs to plan. We walked back into daylight. On the sidewalk the heat had a softer edge, as if the city had turned its face a fraction toward mercy. Raymond paused by the curb. You understand, he said, that the fight isn't entertainment now, it's maintenance. I understand, I said. I've spent my life fixing what breaks. He nodded, which meant good. We parted. At home, the porch steps creaked the same way they always had. Inside, I set Margaret's letter on the mantel beside her photo. The lamplight pooled over the envelope like warm honey. I imagined her at the kitchen table grading essays, drawing small, careful stars in the margins when a student surprised her. I imagined her walking in from school, brushing past me to kiss my shoulder because her hands were full of books. I imagined her stern with me once, the year I drank too much at Christmas, and the way we laughed about it months later when the tree was only a memory. The phone rang twice that evening. Reporters again, maybe, or echoes of people who had always needed something. I let it ring. I brewed tea the way she liked it, strong and a little bitter, a lesson in patience disguised as a drink. The house smelled clean, lemon oil and wood warmed by a forgiving sun. I stood at the window and let the neighborhood move, children folding their play into the hour, a dog deciding at last to sit, a neighbor watering plants the way you water time. My reflection looked back older, yes, but also truer. The humiliation was gone. In its place, a man with a letter and a ledger and a promise to keep both safe. On the mantel, Margaret's eyes, caught forever in that photograph, seemed to be looking just past me at the horizon, as if measuring a sentence before she spoke it. I whispered into the quiet, "You were the bravest person I ever knew." Then, after a breath that felt like an oath, "I won't let them right you wrong." Night came without drama. A breeze slipped through the open window and lifted the corner of the curtain, a small salute. I turned off the lamp and stood there in the gentle dark, the letter a pale shape beside the picture frame. For the first time since the day Daniel told me to leave, I felt not just vindicated, but aligned. The story made sense now. A woman who built a map in secret, a son who tried to sell the legend of a lie, and an old man who thought he had been discarded when, in truth, he had been entrusted. I went to bed with the window cracked, and somewhere between the streetlight and the cicadas, I slept the sleep of someone who has finally remembered where he put his name. 6 months is a strange distance. Far enough for the sting to dull, close enough for the scars to itch. The house breathes differently now. Fresh paint holds the light instead of swallowing it. The porch rail is sanded smooth, the kind of smooth you can only earn with time and patience and fine grit paper. I spend my mornings in the workshop that used to be an office. Late sun slanting through the window, dust rising like quiet applause every time the plane finds true grain. I built a workbench from old heart pine pulled out of a torn-down mill. Margaret would have liked the story in the wood, every knot a memory notched into the board by weather and years. On the wall hangs a simple sign, burned into a panel with my unsteady hand. Do not confuse gentleness with surrender. I read it out loud sometimes, the way a man reads a psalm. The Silver Shelter Foundation began as a stubborn idea and became a small office with 2 desks and a phone that rings more than I wish it had to. We help elders who've been cornered by the people who should have been their shelter. A retired teacher in Pula whose grandson drained her savings. A widower in Beaufort whose caregiver borrowed the title to his truck. A quiet woman in her 70s whose son convinced a doctor to write "cognitive decline" on a napkin so a bank would stop asking questions. We sit with them. We call the banks. We find the right words and the right laws. Sometimes we win fast. Sometimes we win slowly. Sometimes we only manage to stand a person back up and remind them that standing is a victory too. People in the neighborhood still look twice when they pass my fence. Some of them watched the news the night Daniel was led out of that restaurant, faces half lit by chandelier glow. After a while, the double takes softened into nods. At the market, the butcher started calling me sir again without overdoing it. At church, a woman who'd once crossed the aisle to avoid greeting me now places a hand on my shoulder during the peace, gentle as rain. I don't hold grudges for the way people flinched when the scandal was loud. Fear makes cowards of spectators. What matters is who steps back when the dust settles. Daniel writes from prison. Thin letters, careful script, the grammar I taught him years ago suddenly back in fashion. He apologizes for specific things and then goes vague where it would matter most. He says he found God in a service run by an older inmate who used to be a chess coach and a contractor. He says he has a plan for his life when he gets out, and he always folds the plan around the word we, like the future is still a family quilt we might sew together. I keep the letters in a wooden box that smells faintly of lemon oil and regret. I haven't written back. Forgiveness is not a reflex, it is a craft. Some joints take time if you want them to hold. When I think of Melissa, I think of glass, how it shines until it cuts. She requested permission through her lawyer to retrieve sentimental items she left in the house. I set a single suitcase on the porch with the things that wouldn't poison the air. A wedding photo, a college program, a book of poems with her maiden name on the title page. I left the door locked and the porch light on. Boundaries are a mercy for both sides. I visit Margaret in the quiet place where rows and rows of names face the same sky. I bring her tea sometimes, ridiculous, I know, and I read to her from the dog-eared novels she used to assign. Once, a former student stopped by, a woman in her 30s with a baby on her hip. She told me Margaret had given her an A- and a stern note. "You're not allowed to be lazy with a mind like yours." The woman laughed, then cried. I stood with her and let the baby tug at my sleeve. There are kinds of legacy you can't launder or steal. The workshop hums in the afternoons. I cut dovetails by hand, stubborn on principle. Power tools are quick. Dignity likes to take the long road. On the bench sits a frame I've been building for weeks. A portrait of a horizon painted by a friend from church. The sky poured out in amber and blue. In the foreground, a small figure stands with his back to the viewer. He isn't triumphant, he isn't bowed. He's simply there, steady, belonging to the ground he stands on. When I set the frame around that canvas and tightened the last brass screw, the wood settled with a sound like a satisfied breath. Sometimes the phone rings with a voice I recognize from the worst days. A bank manager, a lawyer, a reporter. I speak plainly and briefly. The story is not a performance anymore. It's maintenance, like Raymond said. Gregory still calls me Mr. Carter out of habit, though sometimes he forgets and says Henry, which feels like a second pension. Agent Marsh sent a short note last week with a sentence that made me smile. Truth is slower than rumor, but it arrives on time. I tucked the note behind my "Do not confuse gentleness with surrender" sign. On Tuesdays, a handful of us gather at the shelter office to run a clinic. No fees, no shame. We copy IDs, we write sworn statements, we call grandchildren who need to be told by a stranger that stealing from your grandmother is still stealing. We train volunteers how to read a bank statement for the story it is. The youngest volunteer is 21, the oldest is 83, and she scares bankers in a way I find holy. When a case goes right, we ring a little bell by the door, tarnished and loud. The first time it rang, I had to step into the hall and breathe. I have learned to love the sober rituals, oil the plane, sweep the curls of wood into a bin for kindling, water the ferns Margaret placed on the porch the year before she died, read a page of her letter when my hands start to shake. Boilerplate peace, practical courage. People ask me sometimes what I would say to a man in a motel room who has just been told he's a burden. I would say, take inventory of your papers and your breath. Find one honest person and put your story on their desk.